Good evening, my friends. It's Amy with Ask a Christian Live, the weekly broadcast where I take one of the questions that I've gotten throughout the week online and I highlight it for you for a bit. If you have a question for me, the best place to ask it is at askachristianfriend@gmail.com. You can also find me at facebook.com/askachristian, and you are welcome to make an appointment for my time. We can pray, we can study, you can ask any questions. Sometimes it's fun to just do it face to face instead of online, but you're welcome anyway. Just taking a quick second to thank the 3 new YouTube subscribers this week: Riser Burns, Marta May, and David Jardine. Appreciate you being with me, with us. And by the way, I have been doing a too long didn't watch right up front, but because today's question is actually a series of questions, I won't be able to do that. I tried, but it was a little tricky. But I will timestamp each of the different sections so you can go there, because I do think it's going to be a little longer than usual. So as we look at some of the deep questions for today, I want to let you know a couple of things. We're going to look at some tough stuff today. By the way, I am on vacation in the Sonora area. And I just remembered that a couple of people were asking for prayer for the fires, and we're up here in bad air quality too. So if you are watching, please take a minute and add us to your prayer list, Oregon as well, as I'm sure you are aware. Pretty rough stuff out there. So, okay. As we get into these deep questions today, I want to let you know a couple of background items that will make this easier. Number 1, any Christian who tells you that these hard questions of the Bible are simple and clear and, oh, it's just easy if you just understood this one thing, frankly, is not being very authentic. These are tough questions. We don't have clear answers. We're looking at the heart of God towards sin and suffering. And at the very best, we have a sketch of this problem of suffering and pain and sin in the Bible. And Jesus does talk about it, but to understand the heart of God towards it, we are reasoning, thinking people who still have trouble with this. So if you're in that boat, please know you're not alone. I arrive at the conclusions we're going to talk about today in the same way I arrive at the end of a spicy Indian meal. It is painful and difficult to digest. So if you've got questions and concerns, yay, you too are a real, authentic, thinking Christian, and I appreciate it. Or even if you're not Christian, you're a thinking human, and I appreciate it. So there's the first one. Number 2 is, in this discussion, I will be referring to Satan as a real person, a real being. Many people today believe that he is simply an allegory, that Satan is a symbol for all evil and selfish behavior, which, by the way, I can get down with. I think in some cases that application works really well. So I believe he has become that too. But I believe that Satan is the first cause, the ground zero of this sin problem. So that's why when you hear me talking about Satan as a him, I honestly believe that there's a personification of evil. And it could have been anyone. It could have been anything that was the first cause, right? But this angel happened to be recorded as the first. So, and that Satan just means, Satan is the Hebrew transliteration for the word enemy. So it's just the enemy of God. Number 3, at some point, this being, this Satan, came to earth and persuaded our race to disbelieve God, following after his ways, making it seem like our own way, leading to suffering and eventually death. So if you hadn't heard that story, that's just kind of the brief synopsis, and that will help you make sense of these following questions. So here are the questions I received from Karen from the UK. Thank you so much, Karen, for being my new friend, for having tons of questions and being vulnerable and open enough to ask them. Question: if God created the angels perfect, how could Satan choose sin and evil, something that he wouldn't have known about. As God was the only one responsible for creating these angels, does this mean that God created something that was flawed? And if so, why did he not take responsibility for creating something that wasn't perfect? God then creates a perfect world with human beings and puts a tree in front of them. Why put it there at all? And allows them to be misled by the rebellious angels. If God had gotten rid of the rebellious angels, Adam and Eve would not have sinned, and we wouldn't still be paying for their sins and living in a sad world today. So I'm going to take this in 4 parts. And you guys, I will try to check in every now and then to see if you have comments. So if you have comments, put them up there. And I do want to take a second and thank you, those who are watching. Thank you so much. I see that there are 3 of you watching from Facebook, and I appreciate you being with us here tonight. Again, we'll go through this discussion and take your comments and questions as we go, if they fit in, and then if not, we'll look at them at the end. So let's get on with it. All right, we'll take these parts a little bit at a time because this is a big discussion. All right, so if God created the angels perfect, how could Satan choose sin and evil, something that he wouldn't have known as an option? Good question. Karen, this is huge because even in Isaiah, the prophet in the Bible who is given insight into what happened in heaven, can't explain it. In Isaiah 14:12, he says, "How have you fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn?" This is an exclamation mark in my Bible, but it could have very well been a question mark. How have you fallen? How did it happen? He wants to know the same thing you want to know. A little bit later in that verse and chapter, we are shown 5 statements that this Bible writer sees and envisions or understands that Satan has declared. You can read them for yourselves, but they start with, "I will ascend, I will raise my throne above the stars of God," etc., etc. And so we are led to understand that the primary reason that Satan defected from God is because he had prideful ambition, not just ambition to do great things, that's fine, but he wanted to have the power of God without having the responsibility of God. He wanted to ascend higher than God himself. So this is just me talking. This is not biblical, what I'm about to say necessarily, but it doesn't seem that pride, that selfishness is something that we necessarily have to name or know exists to be able to choose. It doesn't seem that even like pure little babies, who I know have a propensity to sin because we're in a fallen world, but it doesn't seem like anyone needs to be taught to be a little devious, to want to go their own way. You can be playing with a baby and be like, "Come to me," and they'll give you a sideways look and scoot off in the other direction, thinking it's a fun game, right? Nobody necessarily taught them that. They just realize they have free will and they don't want to do what you say. And so I think even in sinless heaven, that realization was still here. And by the way, last point on this one, I don't believe that Satan chose to sin at first. He chose to question God. He was a very intelligent thinking being, and he was ambitious. He wanted to know if there are other options out there. I don't know how or why it occurred to him to question God. It wasn't like he was uncomfortable or anything, but something happened and he realized, I do not have to go along with this. I could go my own way. I could invent something else. And so I don't believe he chose to sin at first. But at some point, even when he saw that the rejection of God's principles meant pain, that the rejection of God's ways meant suffering, he could have repented at any time in history, but he didn't. And he didn't apologize or come back. So his pride was indicated at the beginning of the story, but it wasn't till later when he realized how deeply he was wrong that I believe it would have been considered or counted as sin. So I think he didn't choose sin at first. I think he chose self at first. But putting yourself first it creates, it's like there is light, right? There is light, there is God's presence, and darkness only exists when light is removed. So I believe that by choosing himself repeatedly and exploring that and looking deep into himself instead of deep into the Creator, he ended up choosing sin. All right, that was long and detailed. How are you doing out there? Do you have any questions so far? If you do, go ahead and post them and we'll get to them. All right, so we're building this bit by bit. The second part of your question, Karen, as God was the only one responsible for creating these angels, doesn't this mean that God created something that was flawed? And if so, why did he not take responsibility for creating something that wasn't perfect? All right. Yes, God was the creator of the angelic host, including the angel that led a rebellion, whom we now call Satan. And I believe that just as God created humankind perfectly and we chose to sin, he created the angelic hosts to be perfect and Lucifer sinned. And I don't think you can call it a flaw. And here's why. As you mentioned in your email, God desired to create beings with free will, and this is of the utmost importance to God. His kingdom runs on the principles of voluntary love, free will, voluntary obedience, and service. So God had plenty of options for what kind of beings he could create. And I bet we'll meet some other types of beings when we get to heaven. But he had options. He could have made creatures that acted robotically, who he programmed. He could have made beings who believed they had free will, thought they had choice, but actually ended up being manipulated or controlled. And he could have created beings who knew they didn't have any free will and had the realization that they were kind of programmed and stuck. None of these things seem to reflect actual love. And if we're going to be coherent and consistent, we're reading in the Bible, 1 John 4:8, which says that God is love. Not just that God is loving, but he claims to be the very fabric, the beginning, the end, the essence of what love is. And so because true love requires free will, there was really only, if he's creating out of love, there's really only one type of being that he can create, and that's the kind of being that has true free will. So I can't consider that a flaw, but it is a huge risk. In creating the option for love, he also had to create the option for non-love. And so I think God would cop to that. He would take full responsibility. He would say, because I love, I must create beings who on their own volition love and return that love. So why didn't he take responsibility? To get more detailed on that, in a meta sense, the plan of salvation is God taking responsibility, not for creating the problem, but he says, no matter what, I'm going to make a way through the problem. He says, I am love. And because I am love, my nature is creative. A nature of love will naturally produce. It will create things. It will create beings. Think of a family. Why do people want to create kids in such a terrible world that we live in? Like, love produces creativity. So I do realize there is a huge risk in this love, God says. There is a good chance that at some point, some being is going to try to go their own way, cause destruction and separation. Because of that, we will, as a Godhead, at any cost to ourselves, create a way back. We will send ourselves to live on behalf of those who didn't choose life and love. So he does take responsibility, not in creating the problem, but in solving the problem. All right. What other questions do you have so far? Send them to me. Hit me up. Does it make sense? All right. Now let's get on to number 3, which is where I think it gets juicier. God creates a perfect world with human beings, perfect human beings, but puts a tree in front of them. Why would God do that? Why would he put a tree there to test Adam and Eve? And this eventually allows them to be misled by the rebellious angels. Okay, true. We don't have a perfect and agreed upon timeline for the creation of humanity compared to the angelic rebellion. I don't know where the overlap is, but we can agree that there was overlap because humanity was fresh on earth, it seems, when Satan came down in the form and in a disguised form to talk to Adam and Eve in the garden. So here's an interesting point. The rebellion seems to have lasted at least months, if not years. And imagine what it would take from Satan or Lucifer at the time to go from, servant of God, happy in his role, his name meaning light bearer, so somebody who shed the light of God's goodness. Imagine going from that to like full-blown rebellion. I cannot imagine this happened overnight. So we're looking at months, maybe years, going from prideful angel to gossiping, to questioning, to some undercurrents, to persuading other angels to join him, to outright rebellion and taking a third of the angels. So in the meantime, God has created the earth and its first inhabitants. Now, this is outside of your question, Karen, but the part I don't personally understand is why would God make new populations, invest in new creations when there was a rebellion, clearly a rogue angel someplace else in the world? Have you thought of that? Do you have any answer for that? Anyway, you guys can let me know what you think. So that's not Karen's question. That's my question. But I don't know. Maybe God just had a plan and he was going bit by bit and he doesn't negotiate with terrorists. So whatever, I'm not sure. That's what I'm going to ask in heaven. But back to Karen's question, why would God put that tree in the garden? It seems rude, right? Like when your housemate or significant other knows that you're on a diet, knows that you're reducing sugar, and they are making cakes and leaving them out, or going to the farmer's market and buying pastries all the time. It just seems like, are you trying to sabotage me? I know you're not because you love me, but it sure seems weird. That's what the tree in the garden feels like. Am I right? Well, put yourself in God's position. He's just been accused by Satan and friends of not being fair, that his ways were too restrictive, that he was withholding knowledge and power. Whatever the exact complaint was, we don't know, but we do know that there was a war in heaven. The Greek for war, the word war in heaven is polemos, which is the same word what's that word? I can't think of it. It's the same word where we get polar, politics, and it is a word that designates two separate factions of warring ideas. So Satan in this war of ideas is putting up his ideas as better alternatives to God's ideas of government. And this is what blows my mind. It was such a tight race. It was such a tight race that a third of the angels, after seeing God's goodness and love, were still not sure, and they went ahead and defected with Satan. So it wasn't just like God's like, my ways are good and loving, and Satan right off the bat was like, my ways are other-centered and selfish and are going to cause pain and death. No, they were presented well, likely as here's God's kind of rules, and I want to give you complete freedom. Let's do what you want to do. Let's do what I want to do. Let's see how that works out. So all that being said, this war of ideas is now going through the universe. Like there are two options, and the whole universe is looking on, wondering, what is God going to do? How is he going to combat this? What kind of God do we serve? So now, putting yourself in God's shoes, How does God show himself to be good? How does he prove to us that he's truly a God of patience, mercy, love? That any rules he has are rules to prosper us and not to harm us. What can he possibly do? First of all, here's what he can't do. He cannot zap the dissenters, especially not immediately. Why? Well, that would prove that he was powerful, that he was able to kill and destroy. But what would it do for his government of love? Smacks of coercion, right? Big time. Secondly, he cannot take away any free will or opportunity to remove the other option. He can't just say, well, that's great that you chose it, but you cannot present this to anyone else. Everyone would wonder. That's coercion still. Even protective coercion is still control and coercion. So he must provide all of his beings equal opportunity to choose his ways of other-centered love or Satan's ways of self-exaltation. Again, not that he's pitching it like that, right? So what's he do? Well, on this new planet, he makes a voting booth of sorts. It's a tree. It's a tree that we call the knowledge of good and evil from the Bible. And it is the one place on earth where Satan could actually pitch his government ideas, a voting booth of sorts. So we don't know from the Bible how much God could have prepped Adam and Eve, how much it would have been fair to prep them. But as he's getting to know them, as he's teaching them his ways of love, as he's communicating to them who he is, Eve shows up, listens to the serpent in the garden, and chooses Satan's kingdom as opposed to God's kingdom. So we know from the Bible that God did warn Adam and Eve to stay away from the tree, but they chose to listen. They chose to go their own way. So, all right. Is that becoming a little clearer on why there was a tree at all? Because I remember growing up thinking that was rude of God to put that tree there too. So you're not alone. All right. Here is the last part of the question. Number 4, part of the question says, God had no problem in wiping out all of humanity with a flood. So why did he not wipe out the rebellious angels and save us all from sin? All right. I know this is not what you meant, but point A, God did have a big problem with wiping people out before the flood. But I get what you're saying, because according to the Bible, he did it. So I do have a separate video on this. I will link. I won't go into it now, but think about this. If we come to the table believing that God is a God of love, operating from the principles of love, sometimes he does do things that appear terrible because it is a better long-term solution for the most number of people. Again, like I said at the beginning, 0 easy answers to these hard questions of the Bible. None of them are satisfying. I'm not satisfied by that either, just so you know. But what's it got to do? I don't know. Those are things that we're going to get to see in heaven. So if you're coming to the table with trust, you can kind of give God the benefit of doubt. If you're not, that argument is not going to be helpful at all. So, all right. But to the real part of your question, why did he not wipe out the rebellious angels and save us all from sin? This is the crux, right? He could not wipe out the rebellion without also wiping out love and free will. To give you an example, think of where you go to work. It would be like your coworker having questions about some company practices. You know, maybe someone's worried about ethics violation. Anyway, your coworker starts to look into these questions and then gets fired, or worse, mysteriously disappears or drops dead after making their concerns public. So what are the chances that you, dear employee, would increase your love and loyalty to your company if that happened? And what if it didn't happen just one time? But what if every time someone had a question or a gripe, they got fired or dropped dead? How much would you trust your company? It would start to get really suspicious, right? And so when God is having to decide, look, if I let evil reign, there will be people hurt. But if I don't let evil have some airtime, if I don't let people see the outworking, see what this government causes, then for the rest of eternity, people will not be able to live in peace and in love because they won't know the goodness and the character and the sweetness that comes along with knowing God and trusting God, living in harmony. So people would just keep defecting, fearing God, stirring up rebellion. Like it would just happen over and over and over again. So in order to get through it in one cycle, God has to give equal airtime, basically, to put it in a kind of PR thing. So he has to let Satan's government rule here on earth for a short time so that for all of time, we will be able to tell others in heaven, or as the Bible hints at in other worlds, maybe even other universes, that Satan's ways of selfishness do not work. We lived it on earth, and all it brought was pain and sickness and suffering. So it's the only way that God can preserve free will and love is to let us try it out and see what it yields. Then we can give our feedback to the other worlds, those born here on earth when it's made new. We can let them know, hey, look, we tried it. It didn't work. Now, in closing, first of all, I want to look and see if you have any questions. Okay, none so far. Well, I don't know if I'm a great teacher or a terrible one, but let me know. We're wrapping up here. So I want to reiterate that this stuff is heavy and difficult. All worldviews, except maybe like super strict atheists. But anyway, all worldviews have to wrestle with the problem of pain and suffering. And I have never met anybody who thought, man, it would just be so much better if God had, zapped Satan. Absolutely. That's, it would, but we wouldn't know him. We wouldn't know he was good. We wouldn't know if we could trust him. Whether you're agnostic, Buddhist, deist, materialist, new age, theist, whatever, everyone has to come up with some sort of account of why they believe pain and suffering exists on this earth. So when the Christian worldview gets challenging, and it does, I guarantee it, I invite you to openly compare and contrast to other worldviews. Frankly, they all suck, especially when it comes to this problem of pain and suffering. And while no worldview can offer perfect explanations of life's biggest questions, I just want to let you know that I'm a Christian because I have measured some of these things, and I find out that the Christian explanations are coherent and internally consistent. So that's part of the reason why I'm a Christian, is the answer to this question. And so here's one more bit to close us out about the Christian worldview, which is mind-blowing to me. Did you know that Christianity is the only worldview, in my knowledge, of course, where humans are offered the opportunity to judge whether or not God was fair during the angelic rebellion and beyond? Paul mentions this in 1 Corinthians 6, 2 and 3. He says, don't you realize that someday we believers will judge the world? And since you're going to judge the world, can't you decide even these little things among yourselves? Do you not know that we will judge angels? How much more the things of this life? So he's using it to tell people they need to step up your game and, be able to be discerning. But as part of that, he fully believes that when we are in heaven, we are going to be able to declare whether God was good or not, whether he was fair or not. That's going to be part of our privilege, having lived through sin and suffering and pain on earth. That's cool, right? And then check out Revelation 3:21, which John says, the one who conquers, well, he's speaking as Jesus, but he says, the one who conquers, I will grant him to sit with me on my throne, as I also conquered and sat down with my Father on his throne. So reiterating that those of us who are in heaven will have the opportunity to sit on Jesus's throne of judgment, look through the happenings of the world, and be able to declare if God was good after all, if his government was good, or if he was in error. We will see that even the toughest calls, when there was collateral damage, where humans or angels ended up losing their lives, that God did everything with the most love possible, erring on the side of mercy and forgiveness, until it would be irresponsible to continue to do so. You can be merciful and forgiving to somebody until it hurts everybody else because you've given too much. You know that. You know that's true. Anyway, it's been long. It's been deep. Thank you, Uhina. Good to see you again. This is tough stuff, man. And if it's not sitting right with you, it's not making sense, we can talk more about it. You can make an appointment. But thank you so much for hanging out with me this evening. If you have questions for me, best place to ask is askachristianfriend@gmail.com. You can also find me on facebook.com/askachristianfriend. Make an appointment for prayer or questions live as available. If you enjoyed this, please hit subscribe. Hit the star or the bell on Facebook or YouTube respectively, so you'll be able to join us live next time we do that. I'll see you next week, and until then, I am wishing you joy and peace for your journey, wherever that leads you. If it's Christianity, if it's something else, I am with you as you explore and discover your spiritual side. I'm so happy you joined me. Thank you so much. I want to have a little prayer as we head out. So stand by if you want to join me for that. Father in heaven, I want to pray over everybody who is evacuating from fires tonight, everybody who's worried about it. God, there's been so much weird stuff in our world. We're dealing with a pandemic, and then we're dealing with localized weather stuff. And, on top of that, I know so many people who are struggling with their own ups and downs, relationships, trying to make big life changes, worried about their job. God, we are an afflicted people because of this sin, Satan, and self, because of what we've done to ourselves and to each other, but mostly because we can trace it back to Satan choosing to rebel. And God, we want out. We're ready. We're ready for a new world. God, help us to be able to talk about your goodness in a way that's understandable. Help us to be able to explain some of these tough things to people who want to know. And God, I want to pray for a blessing for everybody who's still within the sound of my voice. Clearly, this is a group of seekers and people who want to represent you. And God, give them, just blow open their mind with understanding. Make them the wisest, the truest, the most beautiful people in the world, so that they can get into conversations to uplift the good. Father, as we close tonight, just ask for your blessing for sweet sleep. I ask that you would bring us together, unite us in your kingdom. Amen. All right. Thanks so much. I'll see you again next week. Bye for now.